At Dad's will reading, they laughed at me. Then my son said, words that changed everything. The lawyer's office was unusually cold that afternoon, the sharp scent of old paper filling the air as the long wooden table gleamed under the fluorescent lights. My father's will had been a subject of curiosity and dread for years, but I never thought it would come to this. The heaviness in my chest wasn't from grief. It was from the years of neglect, the years of being sidelined, of never truly fitting in. I sat at the far end of the room, trying my best to remain composed. The faces of my half-siblings, my father's friends and relatives stared back at me, all dressed in formal black, their expressions cold, expectant, some even a little amused. This was a ritual for them, a tradition. For me, it was the end of a chapter that never felt like it truly belonged to me. Robert, my half-brother, sat at the head of the table, a confident smirk plastered on his face. He had always been the golden child, the one my father looked at with pride. He was the firstborn, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes, even when it was clear to the rest of the world that he wasn't half the man my father made him out to be. I had spent my entire life trying to win my father's approval, trying to be worthy of love that was always reserved for someone else. The lawyer cleared his throat, breaking my reverie. He adjusted his glasses and began reading the will in a voice that was too monotone to be comforting. I, Richard Hawthorne, being of sound mind, hereby declare this to be my final will and testament. He went through the usual formalities, and for a moment, I couldn't focus on his words. Instead, I looked at the people around me, each one eagerly awaiting their turn. It was no surprise when my father's estate, his business, his prized possessions, all of it, was left to Robert. He was the heir, the one who had been by my father's side through thick and thin, despite his many flaws. As the lawyer read off the details, I could feel the weight of each word sink deeper into my heart. It was all being handed over to Robert. I leave the family estate, including the mansion, the vineyard, and all assets pertaining to the business to Robert Hawthorne, the lawyer continued. I could see Robert's eyes glimmer with satisfaction, as though he had already claimed what was his, as though it was just another day for him. I forced myself to stay seated, clenching my fists under the table, trying not to show the anger that simmered beneath my skin. This wasn't just about the money. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, of being dismissed as the mistake. The child who didn't matter. The child who wasn't part of the legacy. Robert, the lawyer said, you are to be the sole inheritor of all of Richard Hawthorne's assets, including the family business, the estate, and the financial accounts. My father had never hidden his favoritism. Robert was the child he'd chosen, the one he'd invested all his time and energy in, the one who had inherited his drive, his business acumen, and even his temper. I was the one who had been forgotten, the one who had spent every family gathering in the background, unnoticed, unimportant. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand fairness. But what good would it do? My father had made it clear time and time again that I was an afterthought, a mere footnote in a life that had already been written. As the lawyer moved on to the final details, reading through provisions for distant relatives and friends, I stood up, feeling my legs grow weak beneath me. It wasn't just the inheritance that hurt. It was the realization that, despite everything, my father had never loved me the way he loved Robert. He had never cared for me the way a father should care for his child. I think I've heard enough, I said quietly, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. The room grew silent, all eyes turning toward me. I could feel the laughter that had been bubbling under the surface from my family members. They had always enjoyed watching me squirm, watching me get pushed aside. They didn't take me seriously. They never did. And now, even as I stood to leave, they didn't seem to care. I'll just go, I muttered, turning to walk toward the door. But before I could make it 2 steps, A small voice cut through the room. "Dad!" I froze. It was my son, Ben. He was sitting quietly in the corner, his small form barely visible behind the towering chairs. But now, his voice was the only sound that mattered. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. He was only 10, but in that moment, he looked like someone far older, far wiser. His expression was serious, his young face filled with an understanding that surprised me. "Dad," he repeated, his voice louder this time. "You're worth more than all of this." The words were simple, but the weight of them, oh, the weight, was enough to make my heart stop. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the room had frozen in time. My half-siblings, who had been whispering and laughing amongst themselves, now stared at my son as if he had spoken in a language they didn't understand. Robert, too, had dropped his smug expression, looking bewildered. But my son didn't stop there. He stood up from his seat, walking toward me with a steady pace, as though the world around him had shifted in that instant. "Dad, I know you're not like them. I know what you've been through. But you're worth more than any of this. More than the money, more than their laughter, more than anything. You are the most important person in my life. And that's all that matters." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. His words were like a lifeline thrown to someone who had been drowning for years. Suddenly, the anger, the resentment, the pain, it all started to fade away. I looked around the room at my family, all of them silent now. Their faces were a mix of confusion, disbelief, and maybe a little guilt. I didn't care. I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I didn't need anything from them. I looked down at my son, standing before me with those big eyes, his small hands clasped together tightly, like he was holding on to me, holding on to the truth of what mattered. And in that moment, everything shifted. The world, the inheritance, the bitterness. All of it seemed so small, so insignificant. I turned to Robert, whose smugness had returned, though his gaze was now uncertain. "You can have all of it," I said quietly, but firmly. "The money, the business, the estate. It means nothing to me anymore. What I have, I already treasure." The room was still. The silence was deafening, but in that silence I found peace. I bent down to my son, pulling him into a hug, my heart swelling with pride. "Thank you," I whispered to him, my voice thick with emotion. "You just gave me the greatest gift anyone could give." As I held my son in my arms, I realized that the inheritance, the wealth, the legacy, they had all been distractions. They had never defined me. The love of my son, the love I had spent my life searching for in the wrong places, was the only thing that truly mattered. And as we walked out of that room, hand in hand, I knew that I was finally free. Free from the past. Free from the expectations that had burdened me for so long. My son's words had set me free, and I would never forget them. You're worth more than all of this. Thanks for watching. For more videos, subscribe my channel.